Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Takshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So our subject today is learning from nature. Nature is a word that gets used very often and in many different ways. We speak about nature all the time here in the Vedanta Center, oftentimes referring to our true nature or the divine nature. But oftentimes when we use the word nature, it's generally we mean everything that is around us, and more specifically we refer to the elements of nature, the material world that's around in its multifarious variety around us. So, speaking about nature is always a fascinating subject, and it's been especially been much on my mind since the last 2 weeks because, as some of you know, and I wrote in the newsletter that was sent out a couple of days ago, I got a chance to visit the Grand Canyon for the first time a few weeks ago. And those of you who have been there know the sheer immensity of the place. It's something that you can, once you see it, you can never really forget it. And so that's been on my mind, and hence this subject. There is a story in the Chandogya Upanishad, is maybe historically at least 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, of a young boy named Satyakama. So we read that he goes to his teacher's house to learn. And sometimes in the Vedic times, the systems are very different and very unpredictable. Sometimes a student would go to the teacher's house and the teacher might begin the lesson right away. Sometimes the teacher might give some task to the student, which could be very completely unpredictable, in the sense when this student went to the teacher's place, the teacher didn't begin teaching the lesson. He just said, okay, here is this herd of 400 cows. Go, take it with you, take care of these cows, and return only after this herd became 1,000 in number. And so this young boy, he takes this herd and then remains out. And then a time comes after some time. We are not told in the Upanishad how much time it took, but then the bull in that herd comes to this Satyakama, his name is, and tells him, now our number has reached 1,000, and now you can take us back. So the Satyakam goes to the teacher. And as soon as the teacher sees him, he says, your face is already shining like the knower of Brahman. Where did you learn all this? How did you get all this? And then this boy says, I learned from, he says the word that is used is, beings other than human. The idea is, whatever was necessary for that wisdom and this transcendent education that he got, it just came to him from nature. There is a story also in the Bhagavata, which is a little later text. It's the story of Avadhuta. Avadhuta is pictured in that book, and the name comes in many other books of the Vedanta tradition as well. The word Avadhuta, it often gets used to an enlightened being who is young, who is enlightened, who is fearless, and usually one who just wanders forth, who has no specific home that this person says is my place. is just completely a liberated soul. And so this section is the 11th book of the Bhagavata, the 11th canto, or skandha they call it in Sanskrit. So this is a conversation between the king Yadu and this Avadhuta. And this king asks him, the king sees this young enlightened being and says, "You look so blissful, you look so free. What is the secret of your bliss? What is the secret of this freedom that you have? How did you get it?" And then the Avadhuta says, whatever he needed to learn, he learned it from, and he mentions 24 teachers. I'll just read to you the list. It's pretty varied list. The earth, the air, sky, water, fire, the sun, the moon. Kapota is a form of a bird, little like a dove. Python, the ocean, river, moth, a bee, elephant, honey gatherer, deer, fish. There's a Kurtisani Mets named Pingala. Kurara is another bird, an osprey. Then a maiden with a bangle. So some of these instances have small stories attached to them. An arrowsmith, a snake, a spider, and a wasp. Now, we don't have time today, obviously, to look at each of the things that he learned from the 24 teachers. But those of you who are interested, do look up that section in the Bhagavata. It's fascinating. And some of the stories are really wonderful. A lot of these things, we can see, just comes down straight from the Upanishadic period. And it's a branch that's today we call it nature mysticism. The connection and awareness of the transcendent that comes through our contact with nature. And some of the core concepts of nature mysticism are known. One is that we are all interconnected, that no matter how much we may think of ourselves as individuals, none of us, wasn't there some book or something called No Man is an Island? I don't know whether it referred to this, but I haven't read it. I've only heard this phrase. But that we are all connected. And this was also one of the core teachings of the Buddha later on, when he said that this is like, so the way, I don't know how it is put in the Pali text, but in English they often translate it as, this is like this because that is like that. Everything in life is interconnected. The second thing, a core concept connected with nature mysticism, is direct experience. That in order to learn from nature, we don't need to read any books. We just get these insights by directly being in contact with nature. There has to be, of course, well, we are all in contact with nature all the time. You go out, we're seeing, well, here in Boston, we see the river all the time. I get to see it every day from my window. And there are trees and mountains we don't see so much here, unless it depends on where you live. But we are in contact with nature. But how often are we directly encountering it? There has to be some kind of an openness from within in order to hear, so to speak, what nature is saying. There is also the belief in nature mysticism, the essential sacredness of nature. Sometimes looking at it too scientifically, it's tempting to just reduce all this to, just material world, just atoms and molecules. It just takes away all poetry out of life, but it also takes away all sacredness from nature itself. There is also a recognition of that the divine is both transcendent, not simply just transcendent, but also immanent, the presence of the divine around us and within us. And finally, there is also this ecological awareness. So this is also a very integral part of nature mysticism. We find it clearly in the indigenous traditions. If you have had a chance to look at some of the Native American traditions, you find there's so much to learn, so much to appreciate in their seeing the sacred in nature. It's there, of course, in Eastern traditions. There is There's so much to see in some of the, I already quoted to you from the Chandogya Upanishad, but many other Upanishads also, the objects of meditation, they have all been drawn from this nature around us. Although sometimes in Vedanta, sorry about this, sometimes in Vedanta, the whole talk about Maya and kind of reducing it all to illusoriness, that's in one perspective that does help, but an overemphasis on that somehow takes to the background the presence of the living reality around us. That, yes, sure, there is Maya and it's all illusory, but where is this ultimate divine? It's not somewhere transcendent in the sense is beyond our thing. The divine is right here around us. So if we can see that the nature who is alive, and that what makes nature alive is the presence of the divine. And we are not able to feel that presence because we have become so materialistic in the sense that matter has become more real to us than that which is beyond matter. We see it also in many Western traditions, and Henry David Thoreau is one great example of that. Some of you would have read his book Walden Pond, and his encounter with nature, what he learned from it, and how it improved him, we find in this thing. And of course, it's not too far from here also as well. So if you actually go there and see, and I'm sure many of you have already done it, it's extremely inspiring. We find it, of course, in many modern environment movements as well, and the combining of environmental concerns with spirituality, and sometimes they call it the eco-spirituality. So this awareness has come through many different traditions, both of the past and the present. And the way this awareness gets emphasized is through meditations, through ritual, through ceremonies, through nature walks, through many creative expressions, through our writings, through our poems, through paintings. There's a lot being done, individually and collectively, to open our eyes to the treasures the nature has around us. Those of us who are the students of Sri Ramakrishna's life, we know that his first experience of samadhi, the transcendent experience, came with something very similar to this. That he was walking, he was just, I think, age of just 9 or 10, the young boy with some puffed rice, muri, in his hand. He was walking in a field in Kamarpukur, this little obscure village, some 60 to 70 miles, I think, from Calcutta. And there was it's a rainy season, the dark cloud in the sky, and he saw a flight of these white birds in a formation going. And well, many of us may have seen something similar, but in his case, it was not just seeing, that there was some kind of a connection between what he saw and his own deepest being. And he just entered into the first known experience of samadhi that he had. So that's what nature can do. It's not simply that it teaches us, but it has the power, if we are open to it, to lift us from where we are and open our hearts to a deeper and a higher reality. Swami Vivekananda first heard of Sri Ramakrishna through his teacher, a Scottish teacher, William Hastie, his name was, who was teaching them Wordsworth's poem titled The Excursion, in which Wordsworth writes about a venerable wanderer, someone with profound wisdom and a deep connection with nature. And while explaining that poem to his students, the teacher said that in his own life, he had seen only one person who answered the description that Wordsworth gives. Wordsworth is seen as one of the prominent nature mystics, or his poetry is infused with these wonders of nature. And so the teacher said there's only one person that teacher had seen and heard about, who answered that description in the poem. And then he referred the students to this saint at Dakshineshwar, Ramakrishna. So that was the first time in Vivekananda's life he had heard that there was someone right in the suburbs of that big city. And we never really know how did this teacher, I think he was a Scottish teacher, how did he even hear about Ramakrishna? Ramakrishna gave no lectures, wrote no books. It's possible that Keshav Chandra Sen, who was a big Brahmo leader, a reform movement leader that time in Calcutta, had written a short essay on Ramakrishna and published it in the local journal. And it's possible that some of the elites of the city came to know about Ramakrishna then. And it's possible that the teacher then had probably visited or somehow come to know about him. And that's why he was able to recommend it to his students. When Sri Ramakrishna, the Keshav Chandra Sen, who wrote that article about Ramakrishna, wrote it without Ramakrishna's knowledge. And later, when Ramakrishna heard about it, his reaction was, he told Keshav, you cannot make anyone great by writing about them in papers. That's a very different take. Nowadays, with social media and PR people, etc., we think the more somehow people get to know about you, the more famous you will be. And Ramakrishna said, no, what the so-called fame and name, if it has to be enduring, then it's not about the publicity or the advertisement that accompanies a person or a thing. It matters who you are. That's what leaves an enduring name behind. And then, of course, we remember the often quoted words of Sri Ramakrishna when he said, as long as I live, so long do I learn. And therefore, learning from nature, it's good to keep in mind that if we are prepared to learn, we will find teachers all around us. Because sometimes, I do oftentimes get emails asking, I want to learn Vedanta, there is no Vedanta Society in our city, where can we learn it from? And that's actually a big question, we are not going to address it today. How do we learn Vedanta? And generally, we might end up suggesting read this book or that book. And clearly, reading books does help. But can or should Vedanta be studied only from books? Or is there something more that is needed? Because sometimes textual knowledge can be helpful, but almost always it's never enough. And that's why learning from nature becomes real. Even whether you get a chance to read Vedanta books or not, but if I can open my heart, I will find the book of my heart will open when I see, and then I see around that there are teachers everywhere. A tree can be a teacher, a river can be a teacher, air can be a teacher, if I am just open to that. So with all that, we will now take a look at some of the examples we find, not only in the text that I mentioned before, the Bhagavata, the Chandogya and others, but also in other Vedanta texts. Some of the things that seem obvious, but something that sometimes when we encounter something every day, we don't notice it. And that can be true, not with just regards to material things, it can be true with regard to people as well. Sometimes just look at our own members of our family or the friends that we meet. Since we see them often, and of course members of the family, we see them every day, we might think that, oh, I know them already. What is there to know? What can I learn? But maybe not. We may be taking too much for granted if something or someone is always readily available to us, near us, we might think that there is nothing more to know about them or nothing more to learn from them, and that would be a big mistake. And nature is a little bit also like that. It's air is always available. You look out, and if you have a garden nearby, trees are always available. Water, sources of water is always available. But how often have we thought, does it have to teach me something? And so learning from nature is a lifelong activity. The earth, for instance, the earth is often, sometimes in many texts, they refer to the earth as Mother Earth. Just as a mother takes care of her babies, it's the earth that sustains us. And so what we learn from the earth is patience, being steady, stable. And so if we again keep our eyes open, we might see it's not just a lifeless planet, that it's living. In fact, in Vedanta, they see this material world as this cosmic body of the divine. The word that gets often used is Virat. So it's not just something material, that if God, again, it's a very generic term, whichever way you think of the divine, if that divine were to express their physical presence, then it would be this through this entire creation. And the moment we begin to look at this world as a physical presence of the divine, our attitude, our approach, our understanding changes radically. Then in the same way, we look upon the people around us. We can just look upon them as fellow human beings, or we can look upon all the labels that we attach to people, or we can look upon the people around us as children of God. And that's something that we have seen before, that oftentimes religious people like to think of themselves in some kind of a relationship with the divine. For instance, if just now we read about the father and mother in the hymn that we had. So if God is our father or mother, then I'm a child of God. And when we think about it consciously, it makes sense. But why is it that I don't remember it always? Why is it that when I meet other people, if God is the father of all or the mother of all, then we are all God's children? Again, this idea is not new. We have seen it through songs, through music, through talks and books. But when we encounter people around us all the time, how often do I see, I'm seeing a fellow child of God. I'm meeting my own brother or sister. Why doesn't it come naturally for me to see everyone as children of God? While it might come naturally for me to see everyone as human beings. That's something we don't forget. Yes, there are fellow human beings. And sometimes they say that it's easy for me to see others as human beings because it is easy for me to see myself as a human being. So my self-identity, my self-understanding does influence the way I see and identify other people. So when I begin to see myself as a child of God, when that identity becomes firm, something that is as natural and effortless in me as my idea that I am a human being. So when that becomes so natural to think of myself as a child of God, it will become much more easier than to see everyone as children of God. So if I'm not able to see the divine in others, it's because I'm not really able to see the divine in my own heart. And that's true with regard to nature as well. So this Virat, some of the nature mystics, they said, they described their experiences. They are sitting in there and watching from their porch a field or a tree swaying, and they say it just feels like the earth is living, pulsating, breathing. And these experiences are very valuable. And so that's one of the messages that can come to us by just thinking about the earth as our mother, someone who is patient, someone who is nurturing, who serves us. Looking upon the the mountains, clearly, mountains are always a fascinating sight, and we can think of the mountains as some books refer to them as perhaps some ancient rishis who have been meditating for thousands of years. So they're remaining unshaken, mountains being a witness, because mountains have a much longer lifespan than you and me, and they have seen a lot more than you and I do. And then they don't seem to be affected by what they see. They just see. So being a witness is something that we can learn from the mountain. Some people have found it helpful that even when we sit for meditation, one of the challenges many of us have is controlling and keeping the mind steady is difficult enough. But controlling and keeping the body steady also is quite difficult while meditating, because we shake, we turn, we twist, and all kinds of things happen. So some people have found it helpful to, at the beginning of meditation, to kind of just remind themselves that the material particles with which this body is made and the material particles with which these mountains are made, they are not different. And so we kind of think the same material that makes up these mountains, which are sitting unmoving steadily for hundreds and thousands of years, may I, for the next 15 minutes or 20 minutes, sit firmly like that. And this is not some magic formula, but with people who have done this with earnestness, with faith, have found that this kind of awareness does help even in the steadiness of their meditation posture. Looking upon the trees, a trees figure in many of these ancient texts as well, and trees are often seen as models of selflessness. They give shade, they give a place to rest, while they themselves may be in the sun, but under them we can find rest. So it points us to the ideal. Can I do that? Can I become like this huge tree and provide that shelter, that rest, that help to those who come to me? Because sometimes the things that we do become so transactional that we want to help, but I don't want to be put into any difficulty. But a tree says, no, I'm willing to suffer if needed, if I can bring some rest and some happiness in the minds of others. So that ideal of selflessness we see from the trees. Air can be a great teacher as well. We can learn from air how to remain unaffected, because we look at air and there are all these good and bad aromas and smells, all kind of there, but the air itself is completely untouched by them. In the same way, that reminds us that the Atman, the spirit, in spite of the changes that occur in the body and mind, both positive and negative, the Atman itself remains unaffected. Space, in a similar way, is present everywhere and remains unaffected by all the limitations. Similarly, the Atman is everywhere. So and in fact, the analogy in many Upanishads to the Atman is often compared to space. Now, space is considered in the Vedantic metaphysic, space is considered the first material evolute after ignorance. So it is still a material thing, but is the closest that we can think about when we try to think about this infinitude of the Atman. Fire is an entity that we see in one form or another around us. There is this tradition called Zoroastrianism. I think if you look at the saying on the wall there. So in fact, that's the symbol that is associated with that tradition. And their temples have on the altar just a fire. a fire is seen as a purifier, that all the trash that is put inside a fire is just burnt away. And so from fire we learn, can I make my heart in a similar way? All the unnecessary baggage, all the trash, all the junk, can I have the power like fire to burn it all off? And so that fire is seen as the symbol of purity. In fact, in the Vedantic monastic tradition, the robes that are of generally this orange shade is because orange is one of the colors of the flames in the fire. And that's why it's seen as a symbol of purity. We see also about the moon, the waxing and waning of the moon. We know it's only an appearance. The moon itself is always the moon. It doesn't become small or big. Similarly, all the changes that seem to be occurring in me are not really occurring in me as the Atman. They are only an appearance because the changes occur only in the body and mind, which are themselves not ultimately real. We remember also Holy Mother's prayer. And mothers prayed that even on the moon there are these spots on the moon, but may my mind be spotless. So, and that's fascinating. I mean, we all look at the moon. When Mother looked at the moon, she saw the spots. She reminded of the purity of the mind, and she reminded that may my mind be so clean and pure that even those spots like that, may there be no spots in my heart. That's what I mean by nature speaking with us, connecting with our own life situation. Similarly, the sun appears in many Vedanta texts as well. A common example that comes is of the how the one reality can appear in many, as many. And the example they give is of the sun shining in the sky, and then you have these 10 containers filled with water, and you are able to see 10 suns, a reflection of the sun in those 10 containers. Now, it's not as if in every container you see 1/10 of the sun. You see a complete sun. So apparently, there are 11 suns, 10 of these reflections and one above. But we know among these 11 suns, only one is real. Exactly in the same way, there are these millions and trillions of objects living and non-living in this world. All of these are simply reflections. The reality is always one. So looking at the sun and thinking of this example reminds us of how the many and the one can be present and how the one alone is ultimately real. Similarly, there is this ideal of what they call yajna, or sacrifice. It's a way of completing the circle. We learn that from the sun. The sun takes the water up as vapor and then returns it down as rain, kind of completing the circle. And so that reminds us, can I complete the circle in my own life? So what does it mean, completing a circle in my own life? No matter, sometimes some people like to describe themselves as being self-made, that I didn't receive any help, I did it just by myself. I can tell you, don't believe if anyone says anything, something similar to that. None of us is self-made. If we just look deeply, we see that right from the moment we are born, there are so many things we have received from so many areas. In fact, without the care and nourishment that was given to us, we were totally helpless when we were born. We had no idea what was going on. And it's the kindness and love of the people around us, oftentimes our parents, who took care of us. That is how we were able to even survive. So all the love and nourishment we got from the time we were born, later on, of course, we meet friends and then other extended family. All of these things have gone in me. I have received all this. And then, of course, from nature, I receive water, air. Then from society, from community, I get opportunities for education. All of these things have come to me. And then at some point, we have to pause and say, The world around me has given me so much. What have I given back? Besides complaining about everyone and everything around me. What the sun does is just takes the water and when needed, gives it down as rain. So everything that I have received, I have to be mindful of the fact in what way am I returning it back. And that's yajna. That's the cosmic sacrifice. That I receive love and am I able to love back? I received help from others. It may not always be possible for me to help the same people in the same way, but can I just pass it on? The help I have received, can I help somebody else? And that's how the human race has survived. One generation doing it for the next generation, and that generation doing it for the next. And so these are the lessons we can get by just looking at the sun. The Gayatri prayer, that was one of the first things that is taught in the Vedic period, is addressed to the sun. The sun is we know now with our kind of knowledge of science, the sun is a pretty mediocre star in this larger scheme of things. But to us, where we are physically located, the sun is the brightest object known to us. And so the sun becomes a symbol of that effulgent being, that source of all effulgence, that pure consciousness in our heart. And so the Gayatri prayer is literally addressed to the sun, but not sun as some kind of a physical entity, is a symbol of light, knowledge, wisdom, power. Then we look at the ocean. Again, ocean is often seen as something which is calm but deep and profound. All the waves and all the disturbance is only on the surface. But if you go deep down, it's completely still. So when we look at our mind, and even when we find that at times when we feel we are disturbed, we are stressed, we are anxious, it's good to recognize that the mind is much deeper than we may be aware of. That all the disturbance, the anxiety, the stress is on the surface level. And as long as my life remains superficial, remains on the surface, I cannot get out of this stress and anxiety and worry. That just becomes the norm. That becomes the way my life is. But if I can dive deep, that was this one very famous Bengali song which Sri Ramakrishna used to sing, dive deep in my mind. So if I can dive deep inside my own mind, then I'll reach that spot in my heart which is completely free from all this disturbance. So the ocean teaches me that there is more to me than what is apparent on the surface. When Nachiketa in the Kathopanishad meets his teacher, Yama, and Yama is so impressed by looking at Nachiketa, Shankaracharya in his commentary gives a beautiful description. He says, when Yama saw Nachiketa, he saw Nachiketa as Nachiketa's heart as Maharadavat. It's like a big lake which is unruffled. And that's how he saw Nachiketa, big heart. So we have to stop being little-minded. Can I just open out my heart and become big like an ocean? We know that in a small pond, if an elephant goes there, the whole water is going to be disturbed. But if an elephant walks into Lake Michigan, for instance, the Lake Michigan doesn't care. Even 100 elephants can come. It just remains constant. That's how we want our heart to be. Yes, in the external world and both in the world immediately around us, there are always going to be ups and downs. Lots of elephants are going to walk inside our mind. But if my mind can become vast and deep like the ocean, then this coming and going will not affect me. I mean, sometimes look at it, the ocean kind of remains. Yes, there are tides, but rivers pour their water into the ocean, but the ocean somehow seems to be always the ocean. It doesn't seem to dry up or anything. And so that kind of a constancy and depth is something that we want to have in our own lives. Sometimes the example is given of a moth. What do we learn from a moth? And we see that the moth's attraction to the glow of fire and ultimate destruction. And something like that can happen if I'm not careful. If I am attracted, a devotee, a spiritual seeker says, if I'm drawn to things that take me away from my ideal, away from God, then that would mean spiritual perishing for me, the way a moth it's perished in fire. And so, looking at all these little things, we get to learn, and this collective wisdom might one day then teach us that the nature of the material world is that it's perishable, it's temporary. Yes, it can be fascinating, but everything, it can be huge. I mean, you look at some of those rocks at the Grand Canyon, and it's so much history is there, and you can actually see, because it's a canyon, you actually see the layers of rocks that were formed at different points in history. And some of the rocks are 300, 400, 500 million years old. It's mind-boggling even to think of that high numbers. And some of these early explorers and geologists have given names to these different rocks to keep them, identify them, and become easier then. And it was a pleasant surprise for me to see that the oldest among these rocks, which are like 400, 500 millions of years ago, it was quite stunning because they are named Brahma, Vishnu, and Rama. Shiva somehow was not there. But some of these rock formations above, which kind of have these dome-like structures, and I think it was very wise that these early explorers and geologists who named them, they took these motifs from different traditions, from different cultures. So there is a temple of Isis there. And one of the formation is called a Shiva temple. And I was curious, like, what makes them call this a Shiva temple? Then I saw an aerial view of that, and it actually does look like a Shiva linga. So the names are not given randomly. There was some thought went into that. And so you look, nature does seem, but even these rocks, which were there for 400, 500 millions of years, it seems like a big number, but it's still a number. It's still limited. It doesn't mean that they are endless. It doesn't mean that they never had a beginning. They did have a beginning. And they might have an end. Maybe we won't live to see that end. But these rocks will turn into something else. The mountains of today, the rivers of today will be the deserts of tomorrow. That's how it is. And again, it's much beyond our limited lifespan as human beings. But even the nature, in spite of its constancy around us, is still perishable. So that awareness then may want us to look inside to see what is the state of nature within me. And so what the books speak about as beyond this perishable world, even though some of it may be live for a few years, some for millions of years, and they don't excuse even these celestial worlds. Even heavens and hells are also temporary. Again, they may last longer than you and I do, but even then they are temporary. But there is something which is permanent, something which never had a beginning and will never have an end. And that Vedanta says is our true nature. So learning from nature in its multifarious ways, multifarious aspects, ultimately takes us back to our true nature. What is my nature? And both from texts as well as the experiences people have had, they see that our true nature is that we are free, we are pure, we are infinite, we are endless. That's not how we see ourselves right now. Maybe we read about it and we like the idea, but it's still an idea. And that is because this other nature has covered us. The idea of mortality has covered my immortal nature. The idea of this perishable body has covered my imperishable nature. So when we are able to look beyond, develop this kind of a spiritual X-ray, if you want, that looking beyond these material layers, then we discover our true nature. So both nature, external and internal, life is about learning. And the more we keep learning, the more we know. And the more we know, it's that kind of a knowledge that will ultimately liberate us. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhu.